Have you ever wondered how a country can run out of retirement money? For decades, millions of Americans believed Social Security would always be there. But recent government projections say the system's retirement trust fund could face serious trouble by 2032. So what is actually happening here? Is this a crisis of spending, a failure of policy, or something simpler hiding in plain sight? The answer is not a mystery in the usual sense. It is a problem of math, demographics, and time. And once you understand it, the debate over retirement looks very different.
At the center of this story is Social Security, the main U.S. retirement program for many older Americans. The core question is straightforward. Why is the system short on money? According to recent projections, costs have been rising faster than income. That means the program has been paying out more than it receives for years, while drawing down reserves to bridge the gap. This is not the same as the system shutting off overnight, but it does mean pressure is building, and the numbers are moving in a direction policymakers can no longer ignore.
When Social Security was created in 1935, the idea was simple. Workers would contribute part of their paycheck through payroll taxes, and those contributions would help pay benefits to retirees. In other words, today's workers would help support today's older Americans. For decades, that arrangement held together. It was built on a shared expectation that enough people would keep working, enough people would keep contributing, and enough people would eventually retire. That basic promise still exists. What has changed is the environment around it.
The system was designed as a pay-as-you-go model. That means payroll contributions from current workers were meant to flow directly into benefit payments for current retirees. It was never built as a large investment fund in the way a private pension might be. The assumption was that the workforce would remain large enough to support the retired population. For a long time, that assumption made sense. But over decades, the balance between workers and retirees has shifted, and the system now has far less room for error than it once did. To understand the pressure on Social Security, it helps to think in simple terms. Imagine a town where 10 workers support one retiree. That is manageable. Now imagine the same town years later, with only 2 or 3 workers for each retiree. The burden on every worker becomes much heavier. That is the essential problem the United States is facing now. The ratio of workers to beneficiaries is shrinking, and that changes the amount of money the system can reliably collect each year. This is where demographics matter. People are living longer, so they receive benefits for more years. At the same time, birth rates have fallen, which means fewer future workers are entering the system. Those two trends pull in the same direction: more years of retirement and fewer people to help pay for them. Over time, that creates a structural mismatch. It is not the result of one dramatic decision. It is the result of a slow demographic shift that has been building for years. Recent projections show that the program's costs are now growing faster than its revenue. That means the gap between what comes in and what goes out is widening. In practical terms, the system has been using reserves to cover the difference. Those reserves were never meant to solve every future challenge. They were a buffer. And as that buffer has been drawn down, the margin for keeping benefits fully scheduled has become much smaller. Another key factor is the number of retirees themselves. As the population ages, more people become eligible for benefits, and more people stay in the system for longer periods. That raises the total amount of support needed each year. This is why analysts keep returning to the same basic conclusion. The program is not facing a single budget shock, but a long-term strain from a growing retiree population and a smaller base of workers financing it. Government projections have focused attention on late 2032. That is the point at which the retirement trust fund could be depleted if no changes are made. It is important to be precise here. Depletion does not mean the program disappears. Workers would still pay payroll taxes, and money would still flow into the system. But the reserves that help balance the books would no longer be available at the same level. That is why the date matters so much. Even after the reserves run low, Social Security would not simply stop. Incoming payroll tax revenue would still support the program. But according to the projections, that revenue would cover only about 78% of scheduled benefits. In other words, the system would still function, but at a reduced level, unless lawmakers act. That distinction is crucial because many people assume the whole program would vanish. The more accurate picture is that benefits could be reduced automatically if no legislative solution is put in place. The practical impact is that workers would continue contributing through payroll taxes, but the money collected would no longer be enough to meet all promised payments. That gap between scheduled benefits and incoming funds is the heart of the issue. It is a budget problem, but it is also a trust problem because people plan their lives around expected retirement income. When that income becomes less certain, the effects are felt far beyond Washington. So, can it be fixed? The short answer from many experts is yes. The issue is not that the mathematics is impossible. The issue is that every possible reform affects millions of people differently. That is why this debate has lasted so long. Options exist, but each comes with trade-offs. Any solution would need to balance fairness, affordability, and political reality. In that sense, the challenge is not just to design a fix, it is to decide who should pay for it. One proposed solution is to increase payroll taxes. That would bring in more money from workers and employers, strengthening the program's finances. Supporters argue this is the most direct way to close the gap. Critics say it would place more pressure on current earners. It is a straightforward idea mathematically, but it becomes more complicated when you consider wages, household budgets, and the broader economy. That is why payroll tax increases are always discussed carefully and never in isolation. Another option is to raise the income cap for Social Security taxes. At the moment, higher earners only pay on income up to a certain limit. Raising that cap would mean more income subject to the tax, which could increase revenue without changing the basic structure of the program. This idea is often presented as a way to ask more from those with higher earnings. As with every reform, though, it comes with debate over fairness, incentive, and how much additional revenue it would actually produce. A third option is to adjust the retirement age. If people are living longer, some policymakers argue that the age of eligibility should move later as well. That would reduce pressure on the system and reflect longer lifespans. But this idea is highly sensitive because not all workers have the same physical demands or the same ability to stay in the workforce longer. So while the math may be simple, the human impact is not. That is what makes this reform so difficult to agree on. There are also proposals to reduce benefits for wealthier retirees. The logic is to target savings more narrowly, while protecting lower-income Americans who may rely more heavily on the program. This approach is often presented as a compromise because it does not change the system for everyone in the same way. But even targeted reforms raise difficult questions about how to define wealth, who would be affected, and how much money they would save over time. Taken together, these options show why the problem is solvable in policy terms, but they also show why solutions are hard to pass. Every reform creates winners and losers. That is why the obstacle is political agreement, not arithmetic. Lawmakers may be dealing with the same numbers, but they are not dealing with the same incentives. And until there is enough consensus to act, the projections remain a warning rather than a fix. At the root of the issue is a broad demographic shift: longer lives, smaller families, and an aging population. That combination changes the balance on which Social Security was built. A system designed for one population pattern is now being asked to serve another. That does not make it broken in a simple sense. It means the original assumptions no longer match reality. And when assumptions change, the financing model has to change with them.
The story, then, is not that Social Security is simply about to vanish. It is that the country faces a decision about how to preserve it. The problem has been visible for years, and the projections have made the deadline clearer. If lawmakers act, the system can be adjusted. If they do not, benefits may be reduced automatically. That is the central forecast, and it is why this debate matters now rather than later. For future generations, the question is not only how much support they will receive, but what kind of system they will inherit. Social Security began as a promise between generations, and that promise still stands. But promises depend on numbers, and numbers depend on people. As the population changes, the system must change too. The only unresolved question is when that reform will come and how much pressure it will place on workers, retirees, and the years ahead.